Oberleutnant Karl Stuckmann pressed his gloved hand against the cold plexiglass canopy of his Junkers Ju-88 G-1 night fighter and squinted into a sky that should have been his uncontested realm, the one environment where German doctrine insisted he held absolute superiority. For years this belief had been more than a mantra. It had been reality. The darkness belonged to them, to the men of the Nachtjagd, heirs to Kammhuber's grid, operators of the most sophisticated airborne radars in Europe, pilots trained to stalk bombers by needlepoint slivers of light and the faintest traces of radar echoes. But as he flew at 19,000 feet, engines humming with the familiar uneven vibration of the overworked Jumo 213 inline engines, something felt wrong in the night. Below, the faint, ragged glow of Berlin's burning districts pulsed through a blanket of haze. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The embers of the most recent RAF incursion still smoldering. By now, the British stream had long returned westward, leaving only debris, dying fires, and spiraling plumes of smoke that twisted upward to meet him. Traditionally, this was the hour when Nachtjagd crews reclaimed their silent kingdom, when the night once again belonged to the hunters who slipped between stars and clouds and brought down lumbering Lancasters with unseen precision. But tonight, as Stuckmann adjusted the tension in his harness and scanned the horizon, he felt the unfamiliar pressure of being watched rather than watching. He nudged the control column, feeling the slight give of the Ju-88's aging airframe, and listened to the steady pings of the Liechtenstein SN2 radar echoing in his headset. The fuzzy hum of the long wavelength set was usually comforting, a reliable heartbeat in the dark, but tonight its rhythmic pulses seemed somehow insufficient, too slow, too wide, too coarse, to grasp the shape of the sky around him. Under his boots, the vibration changed as his board funker, Lieutenant Vogel, adjusted the gain on the radar set, muttering something about atmospheric clutter. Stuckmann barely heard him. He was focused on the vertical stacks of haze drifting upward like ghostly chimneys, the shimmering burnt glow beneath them, the faint silhouettes of shattered apartment blocks still radiating heat into the night. He had flown more than 40 night missions, many of them over this very region. But Berlin's post-raid glow had never looked quite like this, less like a beacon for hunters and more like a funeral pyre. The old certainty that no aircraft with Allied markings could penetrate this deep between sorties, that the RAF's heavies would not return until the following night, rested heavily on his training. Yet the Luftwaffe had begun issuing quiet warnings during briefings. American experimental night fighters had been reported operating with RAF bombers. Strange silhouettes had been glimpsed at extreme altitudes, aircraft that seemed able to climb faster than expected, appear without warning, and vanish before contact formations could intercept. Rumors, Stuckmann had initially thought, wishful propaganda or excuses from less capable crews. But tonight, the air felt tighter, as though the sky itself was holding its breath. He dipped his wing and peered along the leading edge, the pale reflection from the moonless, scattered starlight revealing chipped paint and soot from too many nights spent too close to burning bombers. The Ju-88 shuddered slightly as it cut through a patch of turbulence above the heated air rising from Berlin, and Stuckmann steadied it with a practiced hand. Flying here required instinct, feeling each gust, each micro-shift in pressure, each thrumming complaint from the airframe. But instinct also whispered that something unfamiliar prowled this night. He checked his 6 again, more often than doctrine recommended. The SN2 could detect a bomber with a large radar cross-section at several kilometers, but against a small, agile intruder with advanced radar-absorbent shaping, or worse, one approaching from below in the ground clutter, it might give only seconds of warning. and that was assuming the enemy still used conventional tactics. The thought irritated him. German night fighters were not supposed to fear the unseen. They were the unseen. Stuckmann was no novice. He had learned his trade under the broad umbrella of the Kamm-Huber line during the height of its efficiency, back when the Himmelbett system operated like a vast, precise machine. Each fighter was threading through boxes of sky guided by searchlights, Freya radar plots, and meticulously coordinated ground controllers. Back then, night fighting felt like a grim science, cold, mechanical, effective. Now, in the summer of 1944, those organized systems were fraying under the relentless pressure of Allied tactics. The British had long abandoned the tight bomber streams that made interception predictable. Electronic jamming, window and beyond, had turned the careful German radar network into a field of noise. And with the Americans entering the night war with machines the Luftwaffe barely understood, the sky had become a place of rumors. Fast twin engines with dark paint schemes, silent approaches, advanced radars that could detect a Ju-88 long before the SN-2 could detect them. Black Widows, the whispered term had been. Pilots who scoffed in daylight briefings found themselves scanning nervously at night. He inhaled sharply, the scent of heated electronics mixing with the metallic tang of oxygen passing through the mask. The cockpit was a cramped, glowing cave, dim red instruments, the small radar cathode screen flickering in the corner of his vision, the shifting blue-white shadows cast by the moonless sky. Vogel tapped his shoulder and pointed to a faint blip on the SN-2, too inconsistent to classify, but enough to confirm they were not alone. Stuckmann's pulse tightened. The ground controller had not reported any friendly aircraft in this sector. They were operating independently, a wild sow intercept. Free hunting. That meant whatever was out here with them was either a straggler from the raid hours earlier, a reconnaissance aircraft, or one of them. He adjusted the throttle, pushing the Jumos closer to their limit, feeling the nose lift slightly as the airspeed increased. The Ju-88 responded sluggishly. Aging hydraulics, worn control surface linkages, and months of night operations had taken their toll. But the machine still had solid bones, still carried two powerful engines capable of hauling it through any sky the Reich demanded. Yet, as he searched the void, he became acutely aware that his aircraft, once the pinnacle of German night interception, now felt heavy, almost primitive. The SN-2 radar, with its long wavelength pulses, filled the headphones with a coarse hiss, useless against ground clutter and too easily deceived by modern jamming. The onboard Schrager music upward-firing cannons, a devilish innovation that had once given German pilots an advantage, depended on undetected approaches from below. But how could they approach undetected when the enemy allegedly saw everything? Vogel leaned forward, adjusting the radar gain again. The faint contact vanished, came back, vanished. Stuckmann swallowed. This was no bomber. This was something small, fast, maneuvering with deliberate care, something probing, watching, hunting. A thin bead of sweat formed under his flight helmet despite the frigid air. He kept sweeping the canopy with his eyes, senses keyed to every vibration. The night outside suddenly felt immense and claustrophobic at the same time, a black ocean pressing against the Ju-88 from all sides. Below them, Berlin's glow ebbed slowly, the chaotic quilt of devastation spreading outward into the dark countryside. Smoke trails stretched upward like skeletal fingers reaching for them. But instead of casting comfort, the burning city only illuminated the uneasy truth. The night was changing. This was no longer the realm of the assured German hunter. Something new had entered it, silent, patient, and invisible to the tools he trusted. And as he banked the Ju-88 northward, searching for the source of the elusive returns, the certainty that had defined years of doctrine dissolved into a creeping dread. The night, for the first time in his career, did not feel like it belonged to him, but something was wrong. Moments before, his radar operator Feldwebel Heinrich Weber had stiffened in his seat as the Liechtenstein SN2 radar displayed a strange ghost trace. Not the usual soft, wavering line of a Halifax or Lancaster, not the broad, lumbering return of a Mosquito bomber or an RAF intruder. This one appeared suddenly, sharply, improperly, as if something had materialized inside their defensive zone rather than approached from the edge of it. Contact, aber nicht normal, Weber muttered, adjusting the range scale, his voice betraying the first thread of unease. Contact, but not normal. Stuckmann glanced at the altimeter, then at the artificial horizon, feeling the damp leather of the control yoke under his palm. What direction? Weber did not answer immediately. He tapped the radar screen once with a knuckle, a habit pilots mocked but never forbade, because sometimes it helped, then exhaled. Behind us, and closing. That was impossible. Nothing closed on a Ju-88 G1 from behind at that altitude unless it was diving from far above, and before 1944, only British Mosquitoes operated in that performance envelope. But Mosquito radar signatures were well known, and this was not one. Stuckmann felt the first cold drip of fear run down his spine. He pushed the throttles forward, engines straining as the Ju-88 began a shallow dive. German doctrine demanded control of the engagement. The Ju-88 night fighters were to surprise, intercept, dictate the terms. The moment they were forced into reaction, something had already gone wrong. Weber leaned closer to the screen. Geschwindigkeit nicht möglich. 400. 420. Kommt schneller. Speed impossible. 400. 420. It's coming faster. That was when the sky behind them suddenly bloomed with twin electric blue flashes, not the muzzle signature of cannons, but the reflection of exhaust flame on unfamiliar forward-canted engine nacelles. Stuckmann realized the truth half a second before Weber said it. This was no British aircraft. This was something new. The American P-61 Black Widow had entered the European night, and it was hunting them. Everything German radar school, everything night fighter doctrine, everything the Luftwaffe had believed about the balance of the night war, the certainty that nothing with radar could outrun them, outclimb them, or outshoot them in the darkness, was about to break. The Black Widow's first appearance over Berlin did not simply signal a tactical threat. It signaled a psychological breach in the quiet, grim fraternity of German night fighter crews who had spent years believing themselves the uncontested masters of the nocturnal war. It is this faith, and the moment it fractured, that this story will explore. Because to understand why the P-61 Black Widow terrified Luftwaffe night fighters, one must return first to the world these German crews believed they owned, a world where darkness itself was a weapon they assumed no enemy could take from them. For the German night fighter arm, the night skies of 1941 and 1942 were more than battlefields. They were sanctuaries of professional pride. The Luftwaffe's Nachtjagd was one of the few branches of the German air forces that maintained a sense of mastery even as the broader war turned increasingly against them. The men trained under a doctrine forged by General Joseph Kammhuber, whose elaborate grid defense system, the Kammhuber Line, stretched from Denmark to France. Its purpose was simple: detect British bombers with radar, funnel them into searchlight zones, and allow twin-engine German fighters to destroy them. Every part of this system relied on predictability, precise radar guidance, strict radio discipline, carefully measured interceptor climbs. The night fighters were trained to hunt slow, heavy bombers that moved through rigid bomber streams, and for a time it worked. Claims rose into the dozens each clear night. Pilots like Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer became legends, credited with hundreds of bomber kills. The Ju-88 variants, the Bf-110G2 and later the Heinkel 295, served as the backbone of this nocturnal offensive. These men did not fear the night. They ruled it. By the middle of 1943, the only aircraft that truly troubled them was the British Mosquito, the Wooden Wonder, a twin-engine fighter bomber made of layered plywood and powered by Rolls-Royce Merlins. It was fast, elusive, and extremely difficult to intercept. But even the Mosquito did not frighten them. It irritated them the way a wasp irritates a man already engaged in a larger fight. But the Americans were different. They had not fought the night war until late in the conflict. They had not developed doctrines around night interception or designed aircraft for the purpose in the 1930s. When word reached Germany that the Americans were experimenting with a purpose-built radar-equipped night fighter, a massive twin-engine airborne gun platform with unheard-of firepower, the early reports were dismissed. The Americans, after all, built fighters for daylight, Mustangs, Thunderbolts, Lightnings, fast aircraft meant for escorting bombers and attacking ground targets. Night fighting required delicacy, precision, a mastery of electronics and coordination. The Luftwaffe did not believe the Americans could produce something capable of challenging them at night. They were disastrously wrong. But this disbelief had roots, real historical roots grounded in the years before the Americans ever entered the war. To understand the shock the P-61 produced in 1944, one must understand what the Luftwaffe believed the Americans could not do. The Luftwaffe believed the Americans could not build a fighter with radar sophisticated enough to rival the SN-2. They believed no American twin-engine aircraft could climb as fast as the Ju-88G series with its stripped-down interceptor weight and afterthought armor. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They believed the Americans lacked experience in night interception coordination, the subtle dance of cooperating with ground controllers, radar stations, and searchlights. And above all, they believed the Americans would never risk building a fighter as large and as expensive as the rumored P-61 strictly for nocturnal operations. German doctrine insisted such machines were wasteful. Night fighters were modified bombers or converted heavy fighters, not bespoke machines. Even the mighty Ju-88 had begun life as a fast bomber. The idea that the United States would design an entirely new airframe specifically so pilots could fight in the darkness seemed absurd to German analysts, which is precisely why the first appearance of the P-61 over Europe struck so deeply. It was not merely the arrival of a new machine, it was the shattering of an entire worldview. But before the Black Widow entered the night skies in force, before its arrival transformed the psychological balance of nocturnal combat, the United States had already begun building the industrial and technical foundation that made such a machine inevitable. The American Army Air Forces had studied the night war in Europe long before they joined it. By 1941, as British cities burned and German night fighters reaped nightly victories, American observers stationed in London and at Bomber Command headquarters sent home detailed reports. They noted the complex coordination, the radar-informed interception, the creeping sophistication of German airborne radar sets. They also noted something critical. The RAF was losing bombers in unsustainable numbers. The Americans saw clearly that daylight bombing would eventually push them into the night. by necessity, if not by strategic choice. And so, in the months before Pearl Harbor, the United States Army Air Forces initiated an unprecedented project, the design of a purpose-built, dedicated night fighter from the ground up. This itself represented a philosophical leap. The Americans were building something the Germans would not, an aircraft created for a single role without compromises, equipped with the most advanced radar technology they could produce, and so large it rivaled medium bombers in wingspan. This was the beginning of the P-61 Black Widow. But the Luftwaffe had no way of knowing this. Their entire understanding of American aircraft development was filtered through the lens of daylight escorts and long-range fighters. They assumed any American night fighter would be a modified version of an existing platform, just as the Germans had done. The resulting surprise, when the Black Widow finally appeared, was therefore not simply technological. It was ideological, because the P-61 represented something the Luftwaffe no longer believed the Americans capable of, an aircraft built solely to deny them the night. When the first P-61 units arrived in Britain in the spring of 1944, German intelligence dismissed them as heavy, clumsy, and unproven. They did not know the radar on board, the SCR-720, was far more powerful and had far greater range than anything mounted on a German aircraft. They did not know its 4 20mm cannons and 4 50-caliber Browning machine guns gave it more concentrated firepower than any night fighter Germany had deployed. And they could not know that American crews, trained with a new doctrine emphasizing autonomous interception rather than ground-controlled vectors, would soon operate with a freedom that German night fighters, dependent on increasingly degraded radar networks, could not match. But for the German crews in the air on nights like that one in June 1944, none of this technical detail mattered in the moment. What mattered was the unmistakable realization that the sky behind them, once a safe backdrop, now harbored something faster, something unseen until too late, something with radar that outranged theirs and weapons that outmatched theirs, something hunting them. Oberleutnant Stuckmann had seconds to process the shock before the Black Widow behind him opened fire. But that moment, that precise second, when the belief in German mastery of the night cracked, is where the story truly begins. And it is here that the deeper examination must start, with what the Luftwaffe thought they knew, with what American engineers were quietly building, and with how one aircraft designed in the shadow of early British defeats would grow into a machine that reshaped the psychology of night combat. The true terror of the P-61 lay not just in its radar, its firepower, or its size, but in the way all these elements worked together to create a predator that simply should not have existed in the 1940s. The Luftwaffe's night fighters had learned to expect certain limitations from their enemies. They believed Allied aircraft were either fast or heavily armed, agile or long-ranged, stealthy or powerful, but never all at once. The Black Widow violated every one of those assumptions. German pilots were stunned to discover that the giant, bat-winged American machine, nearly as large as a medium bomber, could slip into tight turns, roll sharply, and climb like a front-line interceptor. What made this even more unnerving was that, in the dark, judging size was almost impossible. More than one Luftwaffe survivor reported that the aircraft pursuing them must have been a single-engine fighter like a Mustang or Thunderbolt, only to catch a glimpse of twin-boom shadows and realize, too late, that something far larger was coming after them. When the Widow fired, the psychological shock was immediate and overwhelming. Its quadruple 20mm Hispano cannons produced a violent, thunderous roar that reverberated across the night sky, followed by the ripping, staccato clatter of the turret's 50-caliber machine guns. These bursts didn't just damage enemy planes, they obliterated them. German night fighters like the Bf-110 or Ju-88 were built on light bomber frames. They were never meant to absorb cannon fire of this magnitude. A single well-placed burst from the P-61 would shear off wings, punch through fuel tanks, tear engines from mounts, or detonate ammunition stores. Most engagements ended so quickly that crews on the ground watching from below could only describe the destruction as a sudden flare, a bright orange flash, and then the dark rain of burning fragments tumbling through the sky. The Widow was designed for exactly that. Short, decisive ambushes where the victim had no chance to fight back. The most terrifying tactic the P-61 pioneered involved stalking enemy bombers from below. While German night fighters were trained to fear attackers diving from above, the Black Widow approached in a way they were almost defenseless against. Its radar allowed the crew to slide silently beneath a bomber formation, using the darkness as cover. The radar operator would guide the pilot upward inch by inch, closing in until the German aircraft was no more than a shadow blotting out the stars. To bomber crews above, the sky appeared clear and empty. They had no belly turret, no warning receiver, no downward visibility, and no time to react when the P-61 lifted its nose and unleashed a blistering upward blast of cannon fire. Surviving German crew members repeatedly wrote that the attack seemed supernatural. It rose from the dark beneath us. We never saw it coming, and there was no sound until the guns fired. In a war already filled with fear and exhaustion, the Widow added a new dimension of dread, an unseen killer emerging from the void. The P-61's effectiveness was amplified by the weaknesses of the German radar network. The Himmelbett system, once the foundation of German nighttime air defense, struggled to track an intruder that flew lower than bomber streams, maneuvered unpredictably, and reflected little radar energy due to its matte black paint and rounded surfaces. German controllers often mistook the Widow for a straggling bomber or missed it entirely. Worse still, the Luftwaffe's own night fighters were frequently guided straight into the P-61's hunting grounds. Their onboard Liechtenstein radar sets, already underpowered and easily confused by ground clutter, simply could not detect the Widow early enough. By the time a German pilot saw a faint shape behind him, or the sudden glow of cannon fire, it was already over. Fear spread quickly among Axis air crews. Nighttime had once been the Luftwaffe's advantage, a cloak that protected bombers and allowed intruders to strike with relative impunity. The Black Widow inverted that balance almost overnight. Crews returning from missions reported being followed by something they could not see, something they could not outrun, something that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Some Luftwaffe pilots began shutting off their own radar to avoid detection. Others flew erratically or dropped altitude to treetop level just to break radar contact. A few even aborted missions entirely after believing they had spotted the Widow's engine glow behind them. The psychological effect was devastating. German pilots were already exhausted from fuel shortages, deteriorating airfields, and mounting casualties. Now they faced an enemy that removed their last refuge, the cover of darkness. One pilot who narrowly escaped a P-61 later confessed, "The night belongs to them now." Among American crews, that remark became a slogan. On both sides of the world, the story was the same. The Japanese, lacking effective night radar networks, were essentially blind against the Widow. Their bombers flew predictable routes with minimal escort, offering easy kills. In Europe, even the veteran Luftwaffe night fighter wings, skilled, experienced, and hardened, found themselves completely outmatched. The P-61's radar, its firepower, its stealth, and its crew coordination represented a leap forward that no Axis design could match. The Black Widow gave the United States something no other nation possessed at the time: total nighttime air dominance. In a conflict where technology often decided who lived and who died, the P-61 didn't just match the enemy. It outpaced them by years, and every time it lifted off into the night, German and Japanese pilots were forced to confront the same chilling realization. Somewhere in the darkness, the Widow was waiting. Night after night, across the fog-drenched airfields of England, the steaming jungles of New Guinea, and the volcanic islands of the Marianas, the P-61 Black Widow was sent aloft with a singular mission: find what the enemy swore could not be found, destroy what the enemy insisted was safe, and prove again and again that darkness was no longer an ally to Axis pilots. By mid-1944, the first operational units were hungry to test their new machine, and the Luftwaffe, stretched thin, overconfident in its nighttime defenses, and unaware that a technological beast had been unleashed, made a perfect first target. What followed over the next months would earn the P-61 its reputation as a supernatural killer. The Widow's first confirmed victory stunned everyone except the crews who flew her. On a moonless night over the European countryside, a pair of P-61s patrolled at staggered altitudes, moving like slow, cautious sharks. One radar operator staring into his glowing scope suddenly whispered, "Bogey, bearing left, range 4 miles, he's yours." The pilot eased the throttles forward, feeling the R-2800 surge beneath the cockpit floor. The hunt had begun. They closed the distance quickly, and soon the German bomber came into view, a faint, ghost-like outline ahead. The Widow crept up until it hovered almost absurdly close, its nose angled slightly off so the cannons could fire unobstructed. The pilot squeezed the trigger. A burst of 20mm shells shattered the night. The German aircraft lit up in an orange eruption, spiraling downward, unable to even evade. The P-61 had barely needed 20 seconds to turn a radar return into a kill. For the crews, it was confirmation. For the Luftwaffe, it was a warning shot they could not yet understand. And then came the first real test. German night fighters, aircraft designed specifically to hunt intruders like mosquitoes and to guard bomber streams. The Luftwaffe's pride, their elite, their veterans. They never expected the hunters would become prey. One of the earliest encounters involved a Ju-88G night fighter cruising at altitude, its pilot comfortably assuming he was alone. His radar operator was scanning lazily. The sky seemed empty and quiet. Unknown to them, a P-61 had already locked onto their aircraft, tracking them for several miles, gaining altitude and position with mathematical precision. The German operator noticed nothing. The Widow slid into visual range, black against black, invisible even from a few hundred yards away. The American pilot matched speed, studying the enemy aircraft in eerie silence. His radar operator whispered the range. 200 yards. Hold it." The pilot nudged the trigger. The P-61's belly cannons roared. The Ju-88's right engine exploded instantly, flames spiraling back along the fuselage. The German pilot tried to roll away, but the Widow was already climbing to attack again, its dorsal turret tracking automatically, stitching the bomber's spine with 50 cal fire. The German crew bailed out, those who could. Ground observers later reported that the burning wreckage looked as if it had been cut apart. Word spread fast among Luftwaffe units. Something new was hunting them, something with eyes in the dark. But the truly shocking moment came when the Widow squared off against one of Germany's most advanced night fighters, the Heinkel He-219 Uhu. This aircraft was no slouch. It was fast, carried heavy armament, and was considered the Luftwaffe's best attempt at a true night interception platform. In theory, it should have at least been able to flee. What happened instead became one of the most whispered stories of the night war. A P-61 flying near the front picked up a fast-moving radar return. Too quick to be a bomber, too large to be a single-engine fighter. The operator realized instantly what they had found. That's a Tu-19, no doubt. The pilot grinned. Then let's go meet him. The He-Tu-19 pilot was confident, cruising steadily after abandoning a fruitless pursuit of Allied bombers. His radar operator suddenly barked a warning something was behind them. The German pilot banked hard, diving to escape. But the Widow stayed on him, dropping altitude with shocking agility. The He-Tu-19 pilot tried a vertical maneuver, expecting to outclimb his pursuer. The Widow chased him straight upward, the R-2800s howling. The German pilot, now panicked, rolled in two. A sharp right turn. The American followed him as if glued to his wingtip. Finally, the radar operator called the range. 150! Clear shot! The pilot fired. Cannon rounds slammed into the Uhu's wing root, tearing the engine off in a single burst. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell from the sky. When the survivor was later interrogated, he admitted he had never believed an aircraft so large could maneuver like that, and that if he had known such a thing existed, he would never have engaged. These encounters marked a turning point. The Luftwaffe was not just being shot down. They were being stalked, outsmarted, and ambushed by a machine they could neither see nor evade. The P-61 had become a psychological weapon. Crews began refusing to fly missions on moonless nights. Others altered routes, delaying operations by hours just to avoid rumored Widow patrols. German intelligence units scrambled to understand the new threat, sometimes mistaking P-61 sightings for entirely different aircraft. Heavy fighters, experimental prototypes, even two aircraft flying in tight formation. They simply could not comprehend how one machine could mimic the capabilities of several. Meanwhile, P-61 crews grew more confident, even playful in their lethality. One famous intercept involved a German aircraft attempting to hide in cloud cover. The P-61 dove into the cloud with it, its radar operator calmly guiding the pilot through complete blindness. Left, now up, hold it. They emerged behind the German aircraft like a ghost materializing out of fog, opening fire before the enemy pilot even realized he had company. Another encounter ended with the Widow flying so close behind a German bomber that the German tail gunner never saw them. He fired blindly into the night, not realizing his shells were passing beneath the American fighter that was stalking him. Seconds later, a burst from the Widow's turret ended the mystery for him forever. But perhaps the most chilling illustration of the Widow's supremacy came in the Pacific. Japanese bombers operating at night over Saipan and New Guinea followed predictable routes, relying on darkness to shield them. One P-61 intercepted a Betty bomber returning from a raid. The radar operator guided the pilot closer and closer until the bomber's silhouette appeared, just as the Japanese pilot began a slow, lazy turn, unaware of the American fighter behind him. The P-61 pilot held fire, matching the turn effortlessly. The Japanese crew, completely untrained for night combat, drifted along as if the sky belonged to them. The pilot whispered, "Not yet, hold," until the aircraft was so close the radar operator muttered, "Sir, I think I can read their tail number." Then the pilot squeezed the trigger. The Betty blew apart so violently the Widow was rocked by the shock wave. The next day, Japanese intercept station recordings captured the bomber's final transmission. "Something is behind me. I cannot see it. Something is behind me." By late 1944, the P-61 had earned its place not merely as an aircraft, but as a whispered legend, an omen carried across briefing rooms, intel desks, and smoke-filled ready shacks from Normandy to the Marianas. It required no propaganda, no embellishment from jubilant pilots or awestruck ground crews. Its reputation grew organically, shaped by the stunned reports of men who survived encounters with it and the silent absences of those who didn't. In an air war obsessed with altitude, horsepower, and daylight glamour, the Black Widow carved out its throne in the domain that had always belonged to the predators of darkness. The difference was that it did not simply inhabit the night, it reshaped it. For the Luftwaffe, who had once believed themselves the architects of nocturnal dominance, the P-61 was a disorienting revelation. German doctrine had been built around the assumption that any aircraft daring to enter the unlit world of night combat would do so at an inherent disadvantage. Slower reaction times, limited visibility, the endless tug of war between moonlight and shadow. For years they had used that darkness as a weapon, leveraging radar, ground direction, and upward-firing cannons to make night an environment hostile to intruders. But then came an aircraft built specifically to overturn those assumptions. Something that hunted with infrared detectors, airborne intercept radar more advanced than anything Germany could field, and a level of crew coordination that seemed almost unfair. For many German night fighter crews, the first indication that a P-61 was in the area wasn't a radar contact, a distant engine note, or a visual silhouette. It was the sudden tearing impact of 50 caliber rounds chewing through control surfaces, or the catastrophic explosion of ammunition cooking off inside a fuselage, events that came without warning, without context, without even the courtesy of a chase. The Widow didn't chase, it appeared. In occupied France, Luftwaffe controllers had begun referring to a mysterious Jäger mit Katzaugen, the hunter with the cat's eyes. Pilots described seeing something that wasn't there on their scopes, faint traces that vanished when investigated, and shape-shifting silhouettes that seemed to absorb moonlight rather than reflect it. In the Pacific, Japanese crews assigned a different legend to the newcomer, the Raiko no Akuma, the Thunder Demon, because its guns spoke with a rolling, unbroken roar that mimicked the sky splitting apart. To many, the P-61 felt less like a machine and more like a presence, an intelligence that used the night rather than suffering through it. And for the enemy, the most demoralizing part wasn't only that it was invisible. It was that their pilots could no longer rely on the one advantage they had always held, the knowledge that darkness protected them. Across both theaters, the Black Widow forced the Axis to rewrite their expectations of night combat. Pilots who once felt untouchable in the sanctuary of cloud cover or moonless altitudes now found themselves stalked with uncanny precision. Radar operators, accustomed to slow, lumbering detection cycles, were stunned by how swiftly the American machine closed in. The P-61 could accelerate through multiple altitude windows, climbing and diving with the predatory grace of a large cat, always arriving at precisely the trajectory needed to attack from the blind angles of enemy aircraft. And its crews, trained obsessively, drilled relentlessly, operated as if they shared a single set of instincts. The pilot flew the aircraft like it was an extension of his nervous system, the radar operator whispered, course adjustments with quiet certainty, and the gunner, perched high in the dorsal turret, sat like a reaper waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What made the P-61 terrifying wasn't simply its speed or its weaponry. It was its ability to sculpt the night into an environment favorable only to itself. Darkness no longer obscured threats. Darkness delivered them. Radar no longer acted as an early warning device. Radar became the P-61's hunting signal, a song only it could interpret fully. When the Widow locked onto a target, every movement the enemy pilot made became predictable, sculpted by desperation and fear. The P-61 didn't react to opponents. It preempted them, It cornered them. It ended them. Japanese pilots flying the Nakajima Ki-43 or Mitsubishi G4M learned quickly that once the Black Widow acquired them, survival relied not on maneuvering but on sheer luck, hoping the P-61 lost radar contact in clouds, or that the night's atmospheric interference caused the Americans to break pursuit. But the Widow rarely lost contact. Its SCR-720 radar pierced fog banks and cloud decks that European and Pacific pilots had long used as their shields. And its infrared searchlight, an unassuming black dome on its nose, enabled crews to track heat signatures even when radar returns grew faint. This was a type of hunting the Axis had not prepared for. Predation guided by a blend of science, electronics, and uncanny intuition. By late 1944, entire Japanese reconnaissance units simply refused to fly certain night routes after losing plane after plane without explanation. German bomber crews taking off from Denmark or Holland would often switch to emergency radio silence mid-flight. Reports of a shadow trailing them, a shape with no navigation lights, sometimes glimpsed only as a darker patch against an already black sky. Psychology became as deadly a weapon as the P-61's cannons, a machine that struck not only from above or behind, but from the invisible spaces of the night, spaces pilots could never fully watch, never fully guard. And the most remarkable thing? The P-61 was not reliant on surprise alone. In the rare moments when its presence was known, when it was spotted visually or detected on primitive scopes, it still dominated. Its twin-engine layout gave it stability and lift in even the roughest night conditions. Its 4 forward 50-caliber machine guns and 4 20mm cannons delivered a symphony of firepower unmatched by any night fighter in existence, and its rugged construction allowed it to withstand punishment that would have crippled lighter aircraft. Crews trusted the Widow not because they believed it could win each fight, but because they believed it could survive any night. That trust translated into performance. That performance translated into legend. It was a legend born not of propaganda posters or peacetime recollections, but of whispered warnings passed between enemy pilots, of anxious glances during nighttime briefings, of the sinking dread when radar operators reported an unknown American-type contact, approaching far faster than any bomber ever could. It was the legend of an aircraft that took every assumption about nocturnal warfare and inverted it. Pilots had once accepted the night as a refuge. The P-61 turned it into a trap. By the autumn of 1944, the Black Widow no longer flew as a newcomer or a technological curiosity. It flew as a statement. It announced to the Axis powers that the United States had mastered a realm of warfare they had once dominated. It proclaimed that darkness was no longer a shield, but an ally, one that now belonged to the Americans. Wherever it deployed, over France, Belgium, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, it carried the same silent message. The night is no longer yours. And as the war ground on into its final year, a chilling realization spread across German and Japanese commands alike. The P-61 was not merely a machine that hunted in darkness. It was the darkness, weaponized, electrified, given engines and teeth. What the enemy feared wasn't the silhouette of the aircraft. It was the knowledge that something unseen was always up there, always listening, always watching, always waiting for the moment to strike. A new kind of warfare had arrived, one where victory was determined not by who spotted the other first, but by who could see in a world designed to blind every human sense. The Axis was only beginning to understand the truth. The Black Widow didn't just fight in the night. It was the night. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.